All right, so get ready, because we are going deep on understanding by design, or UBD, as most people call it.
Right.
You send in some excerpts about it, and we're going to help you kind of break them down and figure out what it all means.
Yeah.
So,
So, I think what's really interesting is that it kind of turns the typical way we think about teaching on its head.
okay.
Like instead of just sort of marching through a textbook, it starts with like where we want to end up.
All
Like
right.
what should students actually understand
Yeah.
and be able to do with that knowledge?
Be able to apply. So
Exactly.
less about memorizing facts and more about, doing something with it, right?
Absolutely. And the authors call it backward design, which I kind of like,
Yeah.
because it's all about creating learning experiences that are truly meaningful
Okay.
and impactful. Think about it.
Yeah.
We all want our learning to be like transferable to new situations,
Right.
to actually be useful in the real world.
I mean, yeah, like knowing the steps to bake a cake is one thing, but being able to actually bake a delicious cake, that's when you really understand.
Exactly.
So that's where that transfer comes in.
Yeah, the whole idea of transfer is like huge in UBD.
Okay.
It's about being able to take what you've learned and then apply it to something new, maybe even something you've never seen before.
Oh, okay. So how do we even get there? How do we
Yeah.
design those experiences that go beyond just like, covering the material in the textbook
Right,
and
right.
actually foster that deeper level of understanding and being able to use it?
Well, one of the things that UBD talks about are these essential questions.
Okay.
And they're not like your typical, what's the capital of France questions.
Right.
They're designed to really like spark curiosity, provoke thinking, and
Get the wheels turning.
exactly.
Okay. Well, now I'm curious.
Yeah,
I love a
yeah.
good question that, makes you really think.
Right.
So what are some of the questions from this material that really stood out to you?
Well, there were a couple. One was, which strangers can I trust? Like that applies to a lot of areas of life.
Yeah.
It makes you think about
Or your criteria?
exactly and, how complex trust really is.
Right. It's not a simple answer.
No, it's not.
And that's what makes it so interesting. It makes you really examine your own, beliefs and experiences and all of that.
Exactly. Or another one, who killed Romeo and Juliet?
Hmm.
Now, anyone who's read the play can tell you the answer, but this one goes deeper.
Right. Right.
It makes
Right.
you analyze what contributed to their fate, love, family, society,
Oh, wow.
all of these different factors. So it's really understanding how complex our motivations and actions are.
They almost sound philosophical, these questions.
That's a great point.
It's not like typical classroom questions.
Yeah, and that's the point. We want students to really think about these big ideas and how they connect to different subjects and to
Yeah.
their own lives.
I mean, this idea of understanding seems to be really central to this whole UBD thing.
It is.
But what does it even mean to understand something?
Well, it's definitely more than just knowing the facts.
Okay.
The source material talks about 6 facets of understanding, explaining, interpreting, applying, having perspective, empathy, and self-knowledge.
Wow. Okay.
So you can see that goes way beyond just reciting information. It's
Yeah.
about being able to make connections and inferences, seeing things from different angles, and ultimately, using that knowledge.
A meaningful way.
Exactly.
So it's not just what you know, but what you can do with it.
Precisely.
And each of those facets is important on its own, I would imagine.
Yes.
I'm curious about those different facets. Can you give me an example, maybe like perspective?
Yeah, so imagine you're working on a project with a team,
Okay.
and there's a disagreement about, what direction to take.
Yeah.
Now, if everyone is just focused on their own ideas,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably going to hit a wall.
Right.
But if you can step back and try to understand your teammates' perspective, their concerns, their motivations, then you can start to find some common ground and come up with a solution that works for everyone.
I see. So perspective is like being able to see the big picture
Yeah,
and understanding everybody's viewpoint.
exactly. That's what it's all about.
And that's important not just in school, but in life.
Absolutely.
It helps you in so many different areas to be able to, navigate complex situations.
And that's what UBD is all about, equipping students with the tools and understanding they need to succeed in the real world, whatever that looks like for them.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this all fits together. We've got those questions that are driving, the inquiry, and then that multifaceted understanding is the goal.
Right,
But what about the actual learning process?
right.
Like, how does UBD approach that?
That's where they introduce this idea of an AMT learning plan,
Okay.
which stands for acquisition, meaning making, and transfer.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah.
So acquisition, it sounds like it's about getting knowledge.
It is. It's about getting the foundational knowledge and skills needed to understand something, like reading textbooks, listening to lectures, practicing skills.
So it's like gathering all the ingredients before you can bake the cake.
Exactly. But just having ingredients doesn't mean you can bake a cake.
Right.
You need to understand how those ingredients work together, how to mix them, how to adjust if something goes wrong.
Okay.
That's where meaning making comes in.
So it's about going beyond the facts
Right.
to really understanding it.
Exactly. Drawing inferences, making connections, coming to your own understanding of it.
And then finally, there's transfer, which we've talked about.
Yeah.
Being able to apply it.
Yeah. It's about taking the baking skills you've learned and maybe making a completely different dessert. Maybe inventing your own recipe.
Wow.
It's about being able to adapt and use what.
I like how you keep coming back to that cake example. It
Yeah.
really helps me solidify it in my mind.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
I can picture it now.
And what's interesting is that these three stages, acquisition, meaning making, and transfer, they don't always happen, step by step.
Okay, so it's not always just A, then M, then T.
Right. Sometimes you might start with an activity, then you go back and get the knowledge you need to make sense of what you just did.
I see.
Or you're trying to apply what you know and then realize you have to revisit some of the basic concepts.
So it's more fluid.
Exactly. And UPD recognizes this.
Okay.
And it gives you a framework to design learning experiences that support all those stages in a meaningful way.
It's really making me rethink how I learn.
Yeah.
I've always been more of a just give me the facts kind of learner.
Yeah.
But I'm realizing the importance of that meaning making and transfer.
And that's what's exciting about it. It's not just changing what we teach, but how we teach and how we think about learning itself.
Right.
It's a shift from just covering material to really developing understanding.
So before we go any further,
Yeah.
I'm curious about the role of textbooks in all this.
Yeah.
Are they out the window?
That's a good question. And one that a lot of educators are thinking about. UBD doesn't say textbooks are bad,
Right.
but it does make us think about them in a different way.
So it's about using them strategically.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
They can be good for acquiring that basic knowledge and providing background information, different perspectives, but they shouldn't be everything.
Right. So instead of going through chapter by chapter, we should be using them to support these bigger goals.
Exactly. It's about thinking of the textbook as one piece of the puzzle.
That's really giving me a lot to think about. And I know we've just scratched the surface here.
There's a lot more to explore in this framework and the material you gave.
I'm excited.
Yeah. And in part 2, we'll look at some specific examples of how these principles can be applied to different subjects
Ooh,
and create, really engaging learning experiences.
I like it. So we've laid some groundwork here for understanding by design, essential questions, the AMT learning plan,
Right.
all those 6 facets. But I'm really excited to see how this all comes together in actual practice.
Me too.
The source material had some specific examples,
Yes.
and I'd love to get into some of those with you.
I was just thinking about that nutrition unit.
Okay.
It's such a great example of how UBD can take something that could be really boring
Yeah.
and turn it into something interesting and relevant.
Yeah, because I remember when I was in school, we did a nutrition unit, and it was just like memorizing the food groups,
Right.
maybe making a poster about healthy snacks. Not very interesting.
Exactly. But with this one, it's not just about those facts.
Right.
It starts with that idea that what you eat has a direct impact on how you feel,
Okay.
physically and mentally.
So it's about understanding the why.
Exactly.
Right.
And the essential questions really get you thinking, what should we eat?
Okay.
And are you a healthy eater, and how do you know?
Hmm.
That gets students thinking about their own choices.
Yeah. I love how it personalizes it.
It does.
It makes it about them.
Yeah, it's not some random concept. It's about them. It's about their well-being.
And, there's no one-size-fits-all answer.
Right.
It's about, what works for you.
Exactly. And the activities in this unit are all about helping them figure that out.
Okay.
They might analyze a family's diet,
Okay.
make recommendations for how to improve it, or plan a healthy meal for a camping trip.
That sounds a lot more interesting than what we did.
Right. It's about getting them to think about the choices they make and the impact of those choices.
And that's where that transfer comes in again.
Exactly. It's not just about knowing the information.
Yeah.
It's being able to use it to make those healthy choices.
So I'm thinking about assessment in a unit like this.
Uh-huh.
If it's not about memorizing facts, how do you know they understand it?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Assessment in UBD is about designing tasks that require students to use what they know
Okay.
and show their understanding in different ways. So instead of a multiple choice test, they might create a personal eating action plan
Oh, wow.
where they analyze their own eating habits and set goals.
So it's giving them the skills they can use for life.
Exactly, empowering them to take charge of their health.
Okay, let's look at a different subject.
Okay.
You've got that example with linear relationships in algebra.
Oh, yeah.
Math isn't exactly known for being super engaging.
Right.
So how does UBD make a difference there?
This one is cool because they show you what it looked like before UBD
Okay.
and after. So the before is that traditional way where you're going through the textbook, memorizing formulas,
Yeah.
solving equations without really getting it.
I can relate to that. I felt so lost in algebra.
Yeah.
It was all just symbols to me.
And that's what UBD tries to change.
Okay.
The after version starts with this idea that you can use these linear relationships to solve real-world problems.
Okay, so now it has a purpose.
Right.
It's not just numbers.
Exactly. And they use essential questions like, how can we use these equations to represent real-world stuff?
Okay.
And what are the limitations of using these models?
So it's not just plugging in numbers.
Right.
It's about understanding what they mean.
Exactly. And the activities are designed to help them do that.
Okay.
Like instead of textbook problems, they might analyze real-world data like height and age
Okay.
or distance and speed to see if a linear model even works.
I see.
Or they could use equations to look at pricing plans for a fundraiser.
No, that's real world math.
Right.
Yeah, it could actually affect how well their fundraiser does.
And that's why it's engaging. They see why it matters.
I'm loving these examples. It really shows how UBD can change things,
Can.
even for subjects that seem boring.
Definitely.
Okay, what about social studies?
Oh, yeah.
Source material mentioned that one too.
Yeah, that one's a good one.
Wow, these examples are really showing how effective this UBD can be
Yeah,
across all different subjects.
definitely.
But the source material also talks about creating a certain learning environment
Right.
that goes beyond just like the activities themselves.
Right. It's about the whole culture.
Right.
And one thing they talk about are think-alouds.
Okay, I've heard of think-alouds,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure I totally get what they look like in a classroom.
So imagine you're working through a problem like on the board,
Okay,
but instead of just showing the answer, you say your thought process out loud.
okay.
You talk about the different things you're thinking about, the challenges, the questions you have.
So you're modeling how you think as an expert.
Exactly. And that's valuable because it shows students that even experts don't always have all the answers right away.
Right, they see it's a process.
It is. It's all about figuring things out.
And that makes it okay for them to struggle.
Exactly. It normalizes it.
Yeah,
And another key element is giving them opportunities to apply what they know,
okay.
more complex ways and on their own.
So not just doing worksheets, but actually using it.
Exactly. And they call this a gradual release of responsibility.
Okay.
You might start by showing them how to do it, then give them some practice with help, and then slowly let them do it on their own.
It's like learning to ride a bike.
Perfect analogy.
First you got training wheels, then someone's holding on, and then finally you're on your own.
That's it. And the feedback you give should focus on their understanding, not just if they got the answer right.
So instead of saying this is wrong, you'd say something like, here's how your thinking is developing.
Right. Focus on the process.
And here's where you could push your thinking further.
Exactly. And be clear about those types of learning, acquisition, meaning-making, transfer.
Okay.
Don't assume they know the difference. Name them, explain them, help them connect it all.
Make the learning process transparent.
Exactly.
So they know not just what, but how they're learning.
And when they get that, they're more likely to really engage.
And finally, you need a classroom culture that celebrates curiosity and all that.
Yes. A place where it's okay to ask questions and challenge ideas and learn from each other.
Where students feel empowered to take charge of their own learning.
Exactly.
Wow, this has been such a thought-provoking deep dive.
It has.
We've gone from theory to actual strategies. It's been amazing.
And this is just the start. There's so much more to explore within this framework and the material you gave.
I'm excited to keep learning.
It's an invitation to keep thinking and trying new things.
I'm walking away from this with a whole new view on learning and teaching.
Me too.
I hope our listeners are feeling the same way.
I hope so. It's been great diving into this with you.
And with you, our listeners,
What?
hope you'll stick with us as we keep going.
Yes.
Until next time, happy learning.